We hear a lot about psychedelic-assisted therapy, but 3 out of 4 people who choose to consume psychedelics do so at home or in nature with friends or loved ones. I'm April, founder of Set, an integration platform to help you get the most out of your psychedelic experiences. The podcast episode you're about to listen to may reference one of my previous shows, The High Guide or How to Do the Pot, because I've been a trusted source in cannabis and psychedelics since 2015. I invite you to visit getsetset.com and sign up for our newsletter to receive your free guide on set and setting to make the most of your next psychedelic journey. This podcast discusses altered states brought on by cannabis and psychedelics and is intended for listeners 21 and over. Hey everyone, it's April, and today is Magic Mushroom Day. Happy Magic Mushroom Day. So I had to release an episode before we officially begin releasing new episodes next week. This is audio that I recorded in June at the MAPS Conference with Senior Policy Analyst for Transform Drug Policy, Steve Rolls. Great conversation on what is happening around the world with legalization and decriminalization and what's worked over the last 2 decades that he's been working in harm reduction drug policy. Also, this episode is a precursor just to let you know that we're here and we're starting new episodes next week. Rather than dropping on Friday, all of our new episodes will drop on Tuesday. And also beginning next week, we're going to release 2 episodes per week, one on Tuesday and one on Wednesday. On Wednesday, beginning next week, we'll start a 3-part series with Jennifer Chesick, author of the Psilocybin Handbook for Women, who is coming to Seattle on November 15th. I will be moderating a conversation with her and a book launch. You can find out more information about that event in the show notes. Also in the show notes, if you follow that Eventbrite link, you'll see that we have a series of events that I will be moderating and hosting every Wednesday beginning October 18th here in Seattle. So definitely get your tickets. These events are going to sell out. They are microdose events. There's a gift with each purchase of your ticket thanks to our sponsor, Of Like Minds. Of Like Minds is Seattle's trusted source for psilocybin and also the sponsor of this show. So you're going to learn more about this brand over the coming weeks. For now, I leave you with me in discussion with Steve Rolls.
My name's Steve Rolls. I'm Senior Policy Analyst for Transform Drug Policy Foundation, which is a UK-based non-profit charity. We do policy analysis and advocacy in the drug policy and law reform space. So we advocate specifically for an end to the sort of prohibitionist paradigm and the war on drugs. A lot of our work has focused on modeling how a post-prohibition world would work.
Okay.
So looking at models for regulating legal drug markets in a post-prohibition scenario. So how would that work? So we looked at all drugs. Mm-hmm. We set up about 25 years ago. And
that's amazing.
Yes.
Can I just interrupt you for 1 second? If you set it up 25, were you a part of the 25 years ago?
Yeah, I was the first. Yeah, I didn't set it up myself, but the person who set it up, I was then employed. Yeah.
Okay. So you had some predictions, and you had some. This is how we're going to map it out. This is how we'd like to see ketamine go to market. This is how we like to. I would love to know how it's actually transpired.
I mean, we operate internationally, so there's actually. I mean, most of the action so far has been around cannabis stuff. Inevitably, I guess. So, and for me, it's amazing because I looked when we started and cannabis legalization hadn't happened anywhere. I mean, there was sort of legalization in the Netherlands, but it was sort of high. And then about 10 years ago, Colorado and Washington, 2012.
Thank you, by the way, for saying Washington. I live in Seattle. At the same time, you said Colorado because very few people know that.
It's like, no, it was Washington as well. I mean, they took a little bit longer to get it up and running.
Right.
But so they did, I mean, Colorado kind of got the first stores open, and then Uruguay, and then things started happening. And so for us, it was really rewarding because by that point, we'd already been doing, we'd done 15 years of advocacy, and then stuff started happening. So it starts to move from an advocacy and campaigning position to engagement with policymakers to actually do, but because we've done a lot of quite sort of nerdy technical stuff about how you would regulate, licensing of vendors and packaging and product controls and in market architecture and tax and price and all these kind of the details of that you have to go through when you regulate something.
Right.
When these policymakers got to the point where they were ready to move, we then often had an opportunity to go sit down with them. So I worked with the federal task force in Canada on their regulation model. And we worked with the government in Uruguay quite closely. I mean, it's a small country. It's easier you have easier access to power. And we worked with the government on their model, and subsequently in Mexico, we had an allyship with a Mexican NGO, and we took the court cases that led to the legalization in Mexico. And now there's all this stuff happening in Europe. There's a sort of second wave of European-style legalization happening, and we're working with the governments in Luxembourg and, on a consultancy basis. So it's been nice, really, for us to move from a kind of campaigning position to a consultancy with government's position. Right. Instead of giving governments a hard time, you're sitting down with them and
it's tactical.
Designing the market architecture of these things. And I mean, our focus has been very much on a kind of prioritizing public health and social justice and sort of sustainable development. So we're trying to look at these things in an international perspective as well as just domestic law. And some of that has raised interesting questions about how we work with industry. So we don't take any industry funding. I mean, we obviously work with industry because they are a key stakeholder.
Yeah.
And we're not anti-industry, but we've done quite a lot of work looking at preventing kind of the emergence of monopolies or oligopolies. Right. So the kind of thing that's happened with the alcohol and tobacco industry globally, where you've got 4 or 5 big mega companies who control like 80% of the global market. And it's not to sort of be opposed to competition or entrepreneurship, to say, actually, when you get companies that big and powerful, it can distort your policymaking priorities. So it's not an anti-business perspective, it's an anti-monopoly or oligopoly, and preventing the kind of corporate capture that can follow on from that, where they use their lobbying might and their PR machines and big fat budgets to change policy in ways that serves their interest rather than the public good.
Yeah, it's not anti-monopoly; it's pro-consumer. At the end of the day, you're trying to protect.
You're trying to protect consumers, and it doesn't. But also the wider society as well. It's not just the consumers.
Good point.
Because these markets do impact on everybody, and there's tax revenue which gets spent more broadly, and all of those things. So that's. It's good in a way that the debate has moved from should we legalise and regulate drug XYZ to when we do it or if we do it or now we're doing it, how do we do it, how do we get it right? What are the sort of contours of your regulatory infrastructure that will deliver on our shared goals, be that public health or social justice or economic or environmental or whatever it is. And then you get into the interesting arena of whose goals we're going to prioritise. Because if you prioritise economic goals, you'll get one model. If you prioritise public health, you might get another. Right. If you prioritise child welfare, you might get another. And different stakeholders will have different priorities, and they all need to be involved in that discussion, and there has to be compromise. And this is the kind of interesting bit of the sort of policy debate where you start to get into those fights, because sometimes different priorities are at odds with each other. Not always. I mean, everyone wants to see crime reduced and everyone wants to see public health enhanced. But something like, if you look at, say, tax on cigarettes, public health people say, put the tax up, because we know that if you put the price up, you'll dissuade people from consuming as much, and you get less smoking, and then less health harm to do with smoking. And that makes sense. And a lot of places have put the tax right up. But if you put it up too far, you start to incentivise smuggling and counterfeiting. So you get illegal activity. So you've then got this trade-off of conflicting priorities, because the police will be saying, hang on, can you keep the price down a bit, because otherwise we're going to get the smuggling, and that's bad. And so that's a sort of example of the kind of trade-offs. There isn't just one form of legalization. You can have very open commercialized markets, you can have very strictly regulated sort of state monopolies. And if you look at like Uruguay and compare it to their cannabis market, compare it to here in Colorado, they don't have branded products. You have to be a member. I mean, it's too restrictive.
You buy it at a pharmacy.
You have to buy it at a pharmacy. I did work on that model, I have to say. We recommended against some of these things.
You think it's too restrictive?
I think membership-based is too restrictive. You have to register to buy from a pharmacy.
Okay.
And you can imagine you're a cannabis user, historically persecuted by the government and the police and authorities, and you just don't want to be on a database as a drug user.
Yeah.
You're just not going to want to be. So, and there weren't enough pharmacies, and, they should have had dedicated outlets, but for whatever reason, I think the sort of medicalization was seen as politically reassuring.
Yes. I'm sure it was the first step that people wanted to take. I'm connecting some dots from your Twitter.
Right.
When you were saying that you would like in psilocybin, as it's commercialized, to not see candy and chocolates And I worked in Canada before it was voted in by Parliament. I'm from the US. I sold a company into the Canadian market and worked up there. So the rollout for 1018 or 1017, 2018 was only flower, right? Or pre-rolls, loose flower pre-rolls. And then they added on edibles.
Yeah, and that was my idea.
Okay, I want to talk about that, obviously, right?
Yeah, so I suggested, look, if you're going to have those other things, have a phased rollout. It was purely from a kind of regulatory pragmatism, which was there was an additional regulatory burden and bureaucratic burden associated with edibles and concentrates and things, and you have to set up all these structures, all these institutions to regulate all this stuff. Don't feel you have to do it all at once. Just do flower to start with, and then do the other stuff in phase 2. Smart. And it wasn't like as anti the second phase stuff. It was just like just make life easy for yourself, because they've got I think 4,000 staff. Is the institution the regulatory entity?
Oh, at Health Canada?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people involved in regulatory enforcement and compliance stuff, because these are big institutional structures. People who kind of, let's legalize weed. It's kind of like, actually, there's quite a big institutional regulatory framework that has to go around that. It costs money to establish. You have to train people. You have to design the institutions and blah, blah. It's actually quite a big undertaking. So my thing was that, don't overload yourself, do it in some phases. And they thought, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it really, from a marketer's standpoint, your job was pretty easy. It was very straightforward. The other question I want to ask you is, you were saying about raising taxes on tobacco,
right,
and how it gets too high, it will dissuade people from buying through a legal outlet, and people will start smuggling in. So 75% of the weed that is consumed in Canada and in California is still coming from the legacy market, because taxes are over 40%.
Right. So again, this is I think it's a bit less than that in Canada now. It's more like half, 40%. Okay. I mean, but it depends whether you believe the Health Canada data.
I hope that's the case, right?
But you can see there's a good trajectory. On year 2, it was about 30%. Year 3, it was like 40, and now it's kind of nudged over 50. And if it carries on that trajectory, if it gets to sort of 70, 80, you'll then be getting. You'd think, okay, that's not ideal.
Let's normalize at that point.
But it's much better than zero, right?
Yeah.
Taxed and regulated, and consumer that can be confident, and there's lines of accountability, but all of that stuff. I think the situation in California was a unique of circumstances, with a ridiculous grey market, or whatever, informal market, dispensaries, quasi-medical. And so there was that weird historical legacy and that weird historical legacy market.
And so much supply.
Yeah, I mean, and up in Canada as well. I mean, apparently they burnt 900 tons of excess production. Which that should be like a crime against humanity.
Yeah, right.
It's like, don't burn it. But what do they do? I was like, okay, if you can't sell it, or it's getting to, can you not like extract the oil or something and store it, or can you not take the THC out or something? You don't just burn it.
Yeah.
Unless it's in an enormous 900-ton joint. But
that's amazing. The whole world comes in.
I don't know how big that would be, but the chocolates thing is a good example of the kind of policy dilemmas you have. I totally understand why people like infused edibles, whether it's cannabis and mushrooms, and people like chocolates, people like gummies.
Yeah.
You're kind of like, well, why don't we have infused? And it's like, I totally get that, and I don't object to people having them and consuming them, but there is this there's a public health concern about pediatric poisonings, and it's relatively minor in public health terms. But where there has been legalization and commercialization of cannabis and candy infused edibles, gummies, whatnot, have become much more available, there has been an increase in pediatric poisonings. Now, the numbers are still quite small. It might have gone from 40 a year in Colorado to 200 a year or something.
Okay.
Or I haven't got the exact numbers, but it's lowish numbers like that. And none of them, I think, were particularly serious, if that sounds a bit uncaring, but no, there aren't no one died. I don't think there was sort of any long-lasting medical harm, certainly not. And compared to the numbers for poisonings from prescription medicines or cleaning products, it's tiny. That which is in thousands.
Totally.
So you might think, well, is that
and
really an issue?
Yeah.
It's an issue when you have the opponents of legalization going, look, you legalize it and you get the increase of fivefold of kids. What's more important, my right to be able to have gummies, or the fact that this is a pain in the ass for everyone else who's trying to legalize afterwards? Because it comes up again and again and again. And now it may be a bit of a bullshit argument, gummies and kids, but it just keeps coming up, and it's politically very potent. It's coming up in Europe. People, just to let people in the US know that every time legalization comes up in Europe, people go, you're putting cannabis in sweets and kids are going to eat them. And so what it's doing is it creates this political headache, as well as being a legitimate public health concern, albeit a fairly marginal one. It's a political headache for other reformers because it's just handing to the sort of Kevin Sabets, smart approach to marijuana type people who just bring it up every time, and they've got a point.
Right.
They've you can't say that it's. They come
it's
up with
not
all
untrue.
No, they may come up with lots of bullshit, but they've kind of got a point with that. And it's like, so we've sort of said, okay, let's not have cannabis-infused confectionaries, particularly when they're in branded
colored and
wrappers that look like regular candy.
I'm not going to show you my psilocybin chocolate-covered caramels with a bright yellow wrapper that
Yeah, but the thing is, I totally understand why people want to have their boutique truffle, chocky mushroom thing. I understand that, and I totally get why consumers want those things, and I'm sure they're lovely products, but right at this moment in time, like a bunch of headlines about kids eat, and there was one in The Guardian last week.
Okay.
So there was a story, there was a thing about how there's been an increase in mushroom-infused chocolate poisonings, and there were some horrible stories about kids getting freaked out and blah, blah, blah. Again, nothing awful happened, and they were sort of sedated, and a day or two later they were fine. But it just makes life difficult.
Yeah.
Because you go, well, look, they're going to commercialise it, they're going to put it in sweets, kids are going to eat it, what are you doing? And that seems very irresponsible, and it is quite irresponsible. And you can blame the parents. And I'm not saying that if you went to a guided retreat or something, if you had your stuff in a chocolate, that's different.
Okay.
I think if you had tinctures or powdered mushroom form that you can easily make into something, you've got a tincture, you can just stick it on a sweetie anyway. It's only a drop, isn't it?
Right, yeah.
You can put it on literally any food you want.
Yeah.
If you've got dried mushrooms, you can stick them in an omelette, you can put them in some honey, whatever. I'm not saying no one can have edible products. It's just branded. It's a bad look.
I appreciate that
this
distinction.
political juncture, it's a bad look forever. Because PowerPoint slide of the candy bars that look like Reese's Pieces or whatever. They just come up, and it's kind of like, got a point. It's not to be sort of churlish and prohibitionist, but it's like, can you just hold off on that shit for a bit? Let us get the law changed, and then maybe at some point in the future you can do it. But people, they want to innovate, they want to entrepreneur, they want to make money, and I understand.
They want to make money. And I think it's what it.
And I understand that. It's like, but is your need to make money from your boutique psilocybin chocolates? Not you. I mean,
no, yeah.
Is it more important than us getting the law changed in Germany, or us getting the law changed in like us Europeans, getting the law changed or somewhere else in the world? And so it's little things like that. I mean, it's not the biggest deal, but it's just one of those things. Because I engage in that debate, every day in high-level policy forums. So it comes up in the UN. I've been in the UN, and people like him to stand up at the UN and will give a speech, and they'll have a slide of the gummies with the packaging, and you're kind of like, well, it's kind of got a point. But there's an inevitability, and then I have to then stand up at the UN and go, yes, but we can legalise it, but not do that. We have options. These are decisions that we are now empowered to make as regulators and policymakers.
Okay.
Or we could do it in phase 2, or we could say, yes, you can have some edibles, but let's not have candy ones. Or you could say, let's keep it to cannabis oil and psilocybin tinctures, or powder form. And if people want to prepare that at home, then they can do that, and that's fine. You can do whatever you like with it. But
okay.
So anyway,
I have questions along those lines. So the reason that I have a chocolate-covered caramel with psilocybin in it in a bright yellow package is because I launched a psilocybin company underground in Seattle last year, because with this podcast, which I started over 2 years ago, that was the question that I got the question that people got about weed 10 years ago, where do I get it? And then it became, what do I buy? And then we're back to, where do I get it?
Yeah.
And so I didn't really have a trusted source that I could refer to people. So I set it up, made up a name, made up an email, and said, oh, you should call this person, or you should email this person. Learned a lot, and now have rebranded it and brought it above ground to launch within Seattle's decriminalized framework, working with the municipality, leading with education, not being able to gift and donate until after you've been through an educational 2 hours of sitting, right? So my question for you is, I am listening to you when you say that the caramels can do harm to all the work that you've been trying to do. What else am I not seeing? Because I don't want to happen with high potency. What happened with high potency THC happened with so what?
Yeah, I mean, I think that
what are some really good? Do this, don't do that.
Well, with psychedelics, the thing is, it's not just one. It's not. There isn't just. We're not just talking about one drug here. We're talking about mescaline. We're talking about DMT. We're potentially talking about ibogaine. And one of the principles of sort of regulation from a sort of of risky products and behaviours from a public health point of view is that you identify vulnerabilities and you identify risks and you target them with risk. So more risky products you would regulate more.
Yes.
So like if you were selling ibogaine candies, caramels, I would say maybe not. Because ibogaine, it's just a very different kettle of psychedelics to magic mushrooms because there's some toxicity issues. It's much longer lasting. You can have a sort of 30-hour experience, and it can be pretty hardcore. I mean, it's all dose related, obviously, but I would regulate ibogaine in a different way to magic mushrooms, and other ones will just come in between it. But it would also depend on the preparation and the product. So DMT, it's like, are we talking about ayahuasca? Are you talking about crystals that you would smoke in a vape? Are you talking about kind of e-cigarette preparations that you can now get?
Yeah. What do you think of the vape pen DMT oil versus the way that people have been consuming it? Because people who are purists do not like this easy access. And they'd also people that someone like you perhaps doesn't like it because it could be mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would need to, as long as it's appropriately labelled and signposted. So you wouldn't want to mistake it for an e-cigarette or a...
Well, they're not right now. Underground, they're not right now. There's
cannabis
no label.
pen. Yeah, but then you get some tedious regulator type like me come along and go, well, there needs to be a red sort of triangle on there saying warning.
Yeah, and that will happen, but obviously not right now. So what about dosing? So these caramels, I'm just using these as an example because it's helpful. They're 2 grams by weight of psilocybin is what's in the caramel, what it's been formulated with.
Right.
Is that too high, right? It's also,
I kind of think with dose, it's going to depend on which strain type of mushroom it is.
Okay.
They vary in strength probably by 5-fold from the most to the least potent one. So that's a question.
So would you say the least is golden teacher and penis envy is the most?
A penis envy. I'd never heard of that before today, and I was like, no.
Okay, that's
I was at one of those stalls in this image store saying, "Come on, that's made up. Surely that's made up."
Terrible name, yes. Named in Seattle.
And I'm guessing it's because the mushroom looks like a cock, and I kind of, that's hilarious.
A donkey. What do they call it? A donkey
dick. I mean, okay, whatever. But it's a bit like some of this goofy names for cannabis strains, which I also kind of like.
Alaskan Thunderfuck.
Oh yeah, really? Can you not just grow up and it's just really annoying because you sometimes see these really sort of stiff policy documents, government documents, and then they'll have these goofy names of strains in.
Right.
I think with dosage, I mean, we've produced a called How to Regulate Psychedelics, a practical guide. It's coming out in a few weeks.
Can someone that's not a policymaker read it?
It's pretty. It's written. We're not assuming knowledge for people.
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of targeting policymakers, but policymakers who don't know anything about psychedelics as well.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's a regulatory textbooky type thing. It's not going to be one you read in a hammock. It's not one you read in a hammock on a hammock down at the beach on holiday, or it won't be on sale in airports and things. But we do talk about dose in that. I mean, I think dose needs to be related to health and risk information on packaging. I think you should have units so you can do control your dose in sort of increments. I would have thought with mushrooms maybe 2 grams is quite... I mean, I think you should have them in units from a kind of threshold dose and have it in increments from there. And 2 grams is well over a threshold dose. That's a pretty chunky dose.
So when you say in units, do you mean in one package you'd have a 250 milligram dose?
Yeah, so
and then a 5 you could...
that 2 grams, it might be in like 4 units or 5 units or something like that.
Sure.
So you could say, I want a small one, a medium one, or a bigger one. Mm-hmm. I mean, 3 grams is kind of a 3 grams is a biggish dose. 1 gram's kind of thresholdy. So 2 grams is somewhere in between there. Mesodose.
Yeah.
But as long as dosage is related to information at point of sale and on packaging, saying, these are the likely effects if you have this dose. If you want to have a lower dose, have half or a quarter. Maybe if you make the product easily divisible, like pills that you could split.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I'm not saying it, but and there will be pill form psilocybin as well.
Yes, yeah.
Presumably, or tincture, you can have 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drops.
Right.
Or capsules, you can have 1 or 2 or 3. Each capsule would probably be a sort of threshold dose, and you could decide to have 2, 3, 4, whatever.
Right.
So I think dosage is important because it's a key variable in the experience and obviously the risk, and people need to be able to make informed choices, and having unit dosages that relate to risk and safety and effect information. I mean, not necessarily bad things to have bigger dose. Some people want that.
Right.
But you want to be able to make those informed decisions. So.
Right. I have one last question. Okay, so as I said, I'm working within this decriminalized framework. The idea is that I can move into other municipalities that have decriminalized and work with local cultivators, create these educational events, and do this around North America, really. And I think this is going to move really fast. And I'm curious what you're seeing, because people are, and I'm not, it doesn't feel like that's the...
I mean, it feels like that here because there's 10,000 trippers in a conference hall and they're all talking about it. When you're in the halls of power, as it were, or talking to policymakers, it doesn't feel like that.
Okay.
But so these things are going to collide, and there will be a period of messy stuff, and there's sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I think it probably will move quite fast in as far as, if you think, like, cannabis moved pretty fast. I mean, I'm using kind of cosmic timescale here. I mean,
Says the man that's been working on this for 25 years.
Exactly. But like 10 years ago, nowhere in the world had legalized cannabis.
Yeah.
Today, you've got 21 states, or 22 is it now? You've got Mexico, Canada, Colombia nearly legalized cannabis yesterday, or day before yesterday, but probably will in the next year. You've got South Africa, you've got Thailand, you've got 5 or 6 countries, Czech Republic, Luxembourg, Malta, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Germany, in Europe. There's a domino effect that's happened, and some states in Australia. There was a referendum in New Zealand that narrowly lost. I mean, it's moving all over the place on every continent. And 10 years ago, there was nothing. So I think the fact that you've had Colorado, Oregon, and all these various few municipalities. Well, Australia's medical, slightly different. Well, a bit, and some of these, and then there are these ones like Colorado. It's kind of ambiguous. It's framed medically, but actually, there's people selling kits there, and if you want to just buy one and grow some shrooms and use them however you want, recreationally, spiritually, whatever, you can. I think it probably will move quite fast. It's interesting. I mean, actually, psychedelics generally have not been a big law enforcement priority. If you look at the data, certainly in the UK, I mean, I was looking to the data and there was like 7 LSD prosecutions in 2019 compared to like 1,200 for amphetamines and about 3,000 for heroin. And they're all Class A drugs, like Schedule 1 equivalent. Schedule 1. The police just don't care about psychedelics because there's no significant kind of criminal activity associated with them apart from the fact that they're illegal. And there's no, public health crisis to worry about. People aren't committing crime to buy mushrooms, So it's a really low police priority, which makes me think it's probably a really low political priority to push back on it. And there's probably not that much mileage in it. How much can we hype this up as a kind of big drug threat that some politician can then come and sort of preen and prance sort of prohibitionist credentials to crack down on? So I don't know. I mean, I sort of worry that we're regulating the sort of safer drugs first.
Right.
And in a way, they are the public health pragmatist argument would argue, no, we should regulate the really dangerous ones first because that's where the big win's going to be. I mean, 70,000 fentanyl deaths in the US last year. Really, we should be regulating opioids to address that.
They are regulated. Well, that's what got us into this mess.
Let me regulate them properly. Let me regulate, proper substitute prescribing and access and supervised consumption and testing and harm reduction and blah, 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 all that stuff.
Taking doctors to golf resorts. And,
no. Yeah. If you give me a quarter of the DEA's opioid overdose prevention budget and absolute power, and I could reduce the overdose deaths by 90% in like a year. It's just not that hard.
That's really unfortunate that if it's that simple, that all of these people...
Well, it went up that. I mean, it went up tenfold in like 5 years because of fentanyl. So we just have to manage. That's a reality. We have to manage it. Yeah. You can't. There isn't an enforcement response to this. The enforcement is what created that problem in the first place by incentivizing more risky products that are more profitable and easy to traffic and all the rest of it. Yeah. We don't have those issues with psychedelics. People don't get addicted to them. People don't die from them. Okay, I'm sure you can find some stories somewhere, but generally people might have accidents once in a while, or there might be some ibogaine issues, but generally speaking, people aren't dying of magic mushrooms. I mean, we had legal magic mushrooms in the UK from 2003 to 2005. Oh. So someone discovered this loophole where fresh magic mushrooms weren't covered by our legislation. And got some official confirmation of this, at which point shops were like, brilliant. And they just started selling fresh magic mushrooms. So within a few months, magic mushroom sales proliferated across the whole country. Okay. And then it all got a bit out of hand, predictably, because it wasn't properly regulated, and a few people got uppity about it, and it was shut down a couple of years later. So that was then made Class A, Schedule 1, life in prison. Not that happens, but... And I did some research looking into what the public health footprint of that period was. It's like, okay, was there a spike in mushroom-related deaths? Like, no, there weren't any. Was there a spike in A&E admissions? No, the data wasn't even collated. Was there an increase in use? It's like, well, there was actually a bit of an increase in use, but there was a drop in LSD use, a bit of an increase in mushroom use. Those trends had been happening before mushrooms were legal, and they varied more since they were banned. So it's like, how much can we read into that? Basically, what I found was nothing. There was no public, if there had been a public health impact of having legal mushrooms,
the numbers would show.
Something would have been registered on some public health surveillance data, and there was nothing. And I was like, even with a completely unregulated, ridiculous market where you could just walk into these head shops that sell pipes and papers and stuff and get magic mushrooms, nothing bad happened. I mean,
I would like to know I think qualitative research needs to happen because maybe a lot of good things happen.
Right. I mean, but you see, the thing is, regulators and policymakers kind of understandably preoccupied with risk management rather than benefit maximization. I mean, I think it's really important you make, and I kind of think the risk management and regulation is probably the appropriate role of regulators, and the benefit maximization is more of a kind of community, social
interesting
duty or responsibility. Yeah. I think it's a reasonable approach to make, but you could see, I think you can certainly make an argument that regulators could be seeking to maximize benefits as well, but they might see that in more kind of policy
I feel like
terms,
in palliative care that might come up.
Yeah, but then you're in medical space again, therapeutic space.
And they're just trying to make sure that the risks
are Okay. The multiple obvious therapeutic benefits from psychedelics, which are, and there's all this research that they're talking about here. There's all this amazing new work coming out showing how they're beneficial for this, that, and the other. And there's a presentation on anorexia this afternoon, and there's the trauma and PTSD and all that stuff. That's all great, but it's kind of different from the stuff that we're talking about, which is the non-medical use. And our thing is 95% of psychedelic use isn't therapeutic medical stuff. Yeah. It's people having fun in festivals and going to parties and going to gigs and, just having a laugh in the park. But the fact there's no money behind that, the fact that you don't have some rich tech bros, kind of wanting to, and these sort of glossy Sunday supplement endless stream of sort of glossy magazine features about the amazing potential psychedelics for mental health and all the rest of it. You've got 95% of the psychedelic use, but it gets about 5% of the attention. So for us, this new book we're writing, which is free to download, by the way, I'm not trying to sell it, is...
you should try to sell it if you want to.
Well, you can buy it if you want to buy a copy, you're welcome, but we're also selling free. It's trying to sort of rebalance that discussion a bit. And just, people can come and disagree with what we're proposing, and that's fine, but we need to be...
But you're operating in reality.
Yeah, you need to be talking about it, and we're not at the moment, enough. Because even in Colorado, I've been talking to some of the Colorado regulators the last few days. It's very much framed in a therapeutic healing centres and plant medicines, and the kind of the non-medical bit is kind of all nudge, nudge, wink, wink within the decrim space. So you can buy your stupid bag of sterilized oatmeal or whatever the hell that is, that you squirt the spores into, and then you leave it on your windowsill for, like, there's about 20 stalls you've seen them, right? There's about 20 stalls selling those kits.
That's the only thing you can sell legally.
Right, but so what you've got is you can sell mushrooms, but they're kind of delayed. You have to wait 5 weeks before you can have them.
Yeah, right.
But they're selling them. But they're not selling them. So it's actually kind of like, oh, come on, let's grow up and just let people sell them.
Well, I'm also selling them but not selling them.
Right.
Yeah.
And, there are people selling them, then selling them and not selling them there as well. Like, you can get a chocolate. Oh. We're doing free samples of chocolate because we can't sell them, but you can make a donation. That sounds kind of like sales. It sounds a lot. Or you can buy this T-shirt and you get your bag of mushrooms free. It's like, it's kind of like. But the fact that you're pushing people into this space where they're having to do these sort of loopholes and sort of stupid, it's all so childish. It's like if they're selling mushrooms, just sell mushrooms. So like Colorado's got this medical system. You've got regulators who are kind of having to set up medical systems, which is weird anyway, because it's not within the medical frame, which is kind of not really their job, or why should they be doing that? But then you've also got a non-medical market, effectively, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, non-medical market existing in parallel with the kits and all the other peripheral bits and bobs, and all the kind of grey market, people selling their caramels or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I kind of think if we're at that point, I mean, I really want Colorado to succeed, because if they do it and then they can say, look, actually we had this sort of semi-grey market for non-medical mushrooms and nothing bad's happened. And you might actually get falls in use of other drugs. Mm-hmm. It's another thing that I'm quite interested in the recreational space is low-dose psychedelics, kind of, sort of sparkly dose rather than sort of elven folk of the forest, elven folk of the trees dose.
Leprechaun.
Yeah, sub-leprechaun dose. That is actually quite a good substitute in recreational settings for alcohol, cocaine.
Yes. More dangerous or
more risky drugs. But it'd be good if we could have that conversation out in the open, like adults, and not all this arsing around with gifting and grow bags and calling it plant medicines and healing centres and all this sort of around it. But just let's just acknowledge what it is, acknowledge that these are useful harm reduction tools in social settings, as well as potentially beneficial to individuals and communities as well. Let's just have that conversation. And I mean, I asked a couple of the state senators in one of the policy sessions yesterday who were here talking about their medical programs. I got up and said, look, this is great. I basically said what I've just been saying to you. I said, look, 95% of use isn't medical. Can you see an evolution of psychedelics in the same way that's happened with medical cannabis moving to recreational cannabis? And they interestingly said, yes, they acknowledged that they were essentially supportive of that. Okay. But that if they pursued it now, their medical programs would be in jeopardy. Sure. So there was a sort of political reality alongside the acknowledgement that it was a good idea. So it was it was actually refreshingly honest from them. Yeah. They were saying, yes, with the one guy who said, yes, I agree with that, and I would like to get there and have that discussion. But at the moment, if I flag legalising mushrooms or whatever, MDMA or something, for non-medical use, I mean, look at MDMA, like 99.9% of it is in recreational settings.
Well, yeah.
99.999%.
Right.
So the clinical MDMA
and we've been healing ourselves all these years in that way.
Exactly. And there was a really brilliant presentation I went to yesterday of Sarah from Zendo Project. You should get her in here. She was talking about recreational use and saying that the therapeutic community can learn from the recreational scene, because the recreational scene can learn from the therapeutic community, and a lot of intention that you can combine sort of therapeutic and spiritual intentions along with your sort of hedonistic pleasure-seeking ones. That's not a weird thing at all, and a lot of people do that. Those are discussions that we need to have, and how they flow over into formally regulated legal availability as well, and access, because you shouldn't be forced to buy illegally, but you also shouldn't be forced to
go sit in a clinic
I've certainly not sit in a clinic with two therapists and
$2,000.
Yeah, $3,500 for your 6 hours. Bargain.
I know. I know we have to start somewhere, but
I mean, when I saw that price list from Oregon, I was like, you're shitting me, $3,500. It's like, and there is this thing of sort of deserving and undeserving sort of drug users. So you and so you've got psilocybin. There's a lot of talk about sort of psychedelic exceptionalism. It has some special status amongst drugs. Other drugs which don't have their spiritual magic, and methamphetamine. It's like no, they're just drugs, and they shouldn't have special status. But even within psychedelic users, you have the party users, second-class citizens compared to the spiritual users, who are second-class citizens compared to the medical users. And within the medical users, the veterans get special status over other traumatized populations because they're veterans, And it's like, it's great, veterans get PTSD treatment, psychedelics, but there's plenty of other traumatized populations who could benefit from that, and who don't have $3,500 to blow on their 6 hours and integration session. So
totally.
There's a lot to talk about, and it's good that these conversations are happening, and that this conference is great in that respect, because at least, for all the reservations I have about and some of the things that I felt are quite discomforting here, at least those things are being discussed, even sometimes at the margins, but they are being discussed, and those conversations are happening. So it's all good. Well, it's mostly good.
I think it's mostly good. I think it's. I don't know. That's an all-fair conversation. Maybe
it's good. When I get home back in the UK from this trip, although I'm going to Brazil first. Actually, I'm going to launch a cannabis book in Brazil. But when I get back, how's that massive conference? It'd be like, it was pretty weird.
It's pretty weird. That's my
It's
take
pretty
on
weird.
it.
There was some really cool stuff. There was some really disturbing stuff, and literally everything in between. So that's what I'll take away.
Well, I'm glad that you're here and that I got to meet you. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.